And let me just talk briefly about how ghastly these things were perpetrated. These weren't just vehicles with munitions in them left to be detonated. Sometimes the insurgents drove around the city watching for a target of opportunity to strike and to detonate. Sometimes they found those who were mentally ill or chronically alcoholic, or those that they could frighten into submission and force them to drive those vehicles, to the point we actually discovered one suspect once who had his hands duct taped to the steering wheel and feet duct taped to the accelerator to ensure that he did what he was supposed to do. So this business of improvised explosive devices became very personal. We also profiled a young man who was 28 years old, whom we never found. But the intelligence folks told us that at 15 years of age, his neighbors routinely turned over their children at 15 to him to become their kind of grand uncle and train in the art and science of suicide bombing. And there's another event that would set you back and think, how in the world could that be that families would give over their 15-year-old children to take that particular path in life? Next slide, please. If you don't have a sense of what Iraq looks like, here's a little bit of video from photos and video from gunships just to give you an idea of what the country is like itself. I often said in Baghdad, the people making the most money were the people who manufactured concrete and the people who manufactured glass, because they all had huge markets after every attack. The only protection we really had were these two things: a counterintelligence unit that tried to get out into the community and get a sense of what attacks were being planned against us, and then physical fortifications like these with tons and tons of concrete. Okay, let me lay the backdrop for this. This was March 9th of 2005. 3 weeks before, we had received some intelligence that there was going to be an attack that was going to come through our northern perimeter. Why the northern perimeter? Because it was our weakest side, because the security of that part of the perimeter was actually operated by the Iraqi Ministry of Agriculture, an element of the Iraqi government, and we didn't own the security. So it was the weak side. They were going to come through and come into our facility and either kill us or kidnap us. We worked with the embassy unsuccessfully to extend our force protection measures out beyond that, but they said no. The Iraqis were trying to form a sovereign government. This was an Iraqi cabinet-level agency, the Ministry of Agriculture, and they could certainly secure our northern perimeter. Well, they couldn't. And 3 weeks after we got this intelligence, at 5:28 in the morning, a Baghdad municipal garbage truck entered the Ministry of Agriculture. Judging by the amount of trash in Baghdad, I think it was the only Baghdad municipal garbage truck, but that's another story. There was a driver and a passenger, both wearing stolen Iraqi police uniforms. We learned later they had armored the cab of the truck. They had set up a 7.62 machine gun inside, but most importantly, they loaded the garbage truck itself with 2,500 pounds of high explosive. They dismounted at the entrance of the Ministry of Agriculture, and they shot and killed the entire ministry guard force. They then came at our northern perimeter. We had a machine gun overwatch that engaged them with no success because they had armored the cab. They hit the wall, they bowed it, but they didn't breach it. They retreated about 40 yards and came at us again. We engaged them a second time. I say we, I mean the men who worked with me and for me. I was, at least had begun by being asleep at 5:28 in the morning. This time when they hit the wall, they got clogged in their own debris, couldn't go forward, couldn't go back. The driver detonated 2,500 pounds of high explosive. This is the result, a 400 square foot crater. It was then, and I believe is still today, the largest vehicle-borne improvised explosive device attack in the war. Next, please. These are two New York City police officers who are doing the forensic after investigation. You can see the mode of travel of the attacking vehicle. What you see there is all that's left of a standard-sized garbage truck. Next. We had 62 armored Suburbans lined up along the perimeter. Every one of them was destroyed either by the initial impact or the cooking off of the gasoline inside and secondary explosions. Next, please. Next. 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 If there was a bright side to this particular attack, We sustained 48 casualties. Those were all wounded. Nobody died. And our greatest fear was that we relied on a fairly large local, national, static security force to protect our compound. Nobody knew in the heat of battle if they would turn against us, throw down their weapons, flee. We had no idea whatsoever. They actually turned and they fought. And when I say they fought, this is what happens. This explosion occurred. We're in a 9-story building. We're blown out of our beds, the walls are collapsed, and we get out of the building for fear that it's going to pancake and to try to get the wounded out to get them medevaced. Under the cover of night, 2 or 3 hours before, the enemy had put riflemen in the buildings around us, so when we came out, as they knew we would, they engaged us with rifle fire. Every one of the Iraqis on our side stood and fought, which was a moment, a silver lining to an otherwise extraordinarily dark cloud that day. And he was weeping when I got there. I don't mean weeping from his injury, he was weeping from grief. And when I tried to talk to him about how can I help you with this, and is your grief about others who were wounded or about this injury that you have, I mean, how can I help you with this? He said to me his grief was about the fact that he knew because he had lost an eye, he'd have to go home and he couldn't stay and fight with his comrades, which I thought was extraordinary. Next, please. This force was so significant it blew the body parts of the driver and the passenger 9 stories high onto the roof of our compound. Next. Next. This is an Al-Qaeda videotape. They taped this attack, and 16 hours later they put it on the internet for everyone to see. This video team belonging to Al-Qaeda was 2 blocks away from us in a minivan. So what you heard was the first engagement with them with machine gun fire, the quiet when they retreated, second engagement with machine gun fire, and then the detonation. And they came and they dubbed this over 16 hours later. And what it says in Arabic basically is death to the American dogs, and death to infidels. And they ran this on the internet. Let me just wrap up by saying that 14 months there, I lost 21 men. 13 of whom were U.S. police officers, like you and me, who came there for whatever reason motivated them, some in good faith, perhaps some not. But 13 of them died there during the 14-month watch that I had. 11 of them were killed by the enemy, most by improvised explosive devices, 2 by accident. And 8 South Africans died who had no allegiance to our cause. They simply came really out of a sense of dedication to their families and trying to take some money home. How well did we do in the training of the Iraqi police? I'd say we did marginally well. It's better now than it was then. It never could be what we had hoped it would be. And the threat and the ever-present risk of the insurgency tended to skew and manipulate everything we had done.